Danny DeVito. A name that immediately conjures images of the most grotesque penguin ever to grace the silver screen, a man who became the absolute personification of chaos in every scene he inhabited. Standing at just 4 feet 10 inches, he possessed a pure, undeniable presence that Hollywood never quite understood, yet could never ignore. He was the short king who refused to be a jester, the powerhouse who turned a physical limitation into a global empire. But what the cameras never caught, what the glossy posters and the prestigious award nominations never dared to whisper, was the one singular force that held his entire turbulent world together. It wasn't the fame, the millions, or the legendary filmography. It was a sharp-witted woman from Brooklyn who walked into a cramped, dusty theater one January night in 1971, forgot entirely why she had come, and found herself unable to look away from the stocky, commanding man on that stage. She chose him before the world had any reason to believe in him. At 81 years old, Danny DeVito has finally pulled back the curtain on a secret that has baffled the tabloids for years, admitting that despite the separations and the headlines, she remains the only love of his life. The story of how he reached this pinnacle through a childhood marked by rejection, a genetic condition that kept him in constant physical agony, and a marriage that refused to die even after the world claimed it was over, is a narrative that will make you rethink every definition of love and endurance you have ever known. To understand the steel in Danny DeVito's soul, you have to go back to the very beginning, to November 17th, 1944 in Neptune, New Jersey, 944 in Neptune, New Jersey. From his first breath, it seemed the world was making a cruel point of telling him he wasn't quite what it had in mind. His mother, Julia, was 40 years old when he arrived, already exhausted from raising several children and facing a life of scarcity. She didn't want another mouth to feed. Years later, she would deliver a sentence that would haunt and fuel him in equal measure. "I didn't want him, but I'm so proud of him." 4 words of devastating rejection, followed by 6 words of conditional pride. Imagine being a little boy left to figure out which of those sentiments to carry in your pockets. Danny carried both of them his entire life. That early sense of being an afterthought, of being the unwanted guest in the house where you were supposed to matter most, created a hunger in him that no amount of fame could ever fully satiate. He used that rejection as fuel, pushing against a world that tried to overlook him, but the shadow of that unwanted childhood never truly left the room. His home life was a study in contradictions. During the daylight hours, his father was a respected gentleman, the well-liked owner of a candy shop in Asbury Park. But when the sun went down and the drinking started, a terrifying shift occurred. Young Danny learned to read the subtle signs of impending violence the way children in broken homes always do: the sound of a key in the lock, the specific heaviness of a footstep. Between 1950 and 1955, the local police were called to their New Jersey home at least 17 times. Sometimes, Danny hid in the darkness of closets. Sometimes he fled to the neighbors, a small boy trying to outrun a giant fear. But he was also carrying a biological secret that no one could see. Danny was born with a rare genetic condition known as Fairbanks disease, or multiple epiphyseal dysplasia. This was the real reason he stopped growing at 4 feet 10 inches, but the height was almost the least of his worries. The disease was a silent predator attacking his joints, his hips, and his knees with a relentless grinding pain. By his 20s, his daily suffering sat at an 8 out of 10 on the pain scale. Yet, in the brutal landscape of early Hollywood weakness was a death sentence for a career. He was told to stay quiet, to hide his limp, to swallow the agony. So he kept his secrets and he kept going, fueled by a defiance that would become his trademark. The early years in New York City were a testament to his grit. He ended up sharing a $75 a month apartment with another struggling actor named Michael Douglas. At the time, Douglas was hiding his own secret that his father was the legendary Kirk Douglas because he wanted to make it on his own. The two of them survived on canned beans and shared their last $27 to print headshots, walking them across the city by hand because they couldn't afford the subway. While Douglas began to book roles, Danny faced a wall of rejection. Casting directors laughed at his height. They told him he was wrong for every frame. He parked cars to stay alive. He stood motionless in a clothing store window for hours, pretending to be a mannequin just to earn a few dollars. For a stretch, he even lived out of his old Volkswagen Beetle, showering at the YMCA and keeping his homelessness a private shame for decades. Hollywood repeatedly tried to break him, once offering him the equivalent of $1 million in today's money if he would undergo a series of surgeries to reshape his face and make him more comfortable for mainstream audiences. In a moment of legendary defiance, Danny took that contract to a beach bonfire and watched it turn to ash. "I'd rather be a first-rate version of myself than a second-rate version of someone else," he told the man who tried to buy his identity. He was 26, broke, in constant physical pain and rejected by everyone, but he was still standing. Everything changed on January 17th, 1970. It was a one-night-only performance of an off-Broadway play called The Shrinking Bride. It wasn't a masterpiece, just a modest show in a New York venue. Rhea Perlman was only there to see a friend in the cast. She was 22, a sharp, funny woman from Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, with the kind of grit that matched his own. She sat in the audience, and then she saw him. On that stage was a stocky man, far from the Hollywood leading man ideal, yet he was commanding the entire room with a gravitational force she had never experienced. He was riveting. Rhea didn't wait for a formal introduction. "I had to meet him immediately," she would later say. "I came onto him big time." They went to dinner and talked until the sun came up. For the first time in his life, Danny DeVito was being truly seen. Rhea didn't see a short actor or a genetic anomaly. She saw the most interesting person she had ever encountered. Danny would later admit he knew within 22 minutes that she was the woman he wanted to spend his life with. 2 weeks later, Rhea moved into his tiny Manhattan apartment. They were two working-class kids with nothing but ambition and a shared toughness, recognizing in each other a home they hadn't known they were looking for. They lived together for 11 years before ever feeling the need for a marriage license. Their commitment was forged in the lean years, not in a legal document. It was Danny's connection to Michael Douglas that eventually provided the breakthrough. In 1975, Douglas was producing One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and insisted on casting Danny as Martini. The studio fought it, wanting a bigger name, but Douglas held the line. Danny was on screen for less than 6 minutes, yet he left a mark so profound that people are still analyzing his performance 50 years later. But even then, the industry tried to push him back into a box. In 1978, Danny made a move everyone called professional suicide. He turned down 3 major movie roles to audition for a television sitcom called Taxi. His agent pleaded with him not to do it, but Danny had read the script for Louis De Palma. He knew in his gut, the same way he had known about Rhea, that this was his moment. He walked into that audition and delivered a monologue so mean and so brilliant it left the producers speechless. A BC was terrified of his height, but the show's creator threatened to quit if Danny wasn't the lead. They gave in, and a legend was born. During the second season of Taxi, a familiar face joined the cast. Rhea Perlman was brought in to play Zena Louie's girlfriend. The producers had no idea the two were living together. They simply thought the chemistry was the greatest acting they had ever seen. In reality, it was two souls who knew each other's every rhythm. They finally married in 1982 in a quiet ceremony. While Danny was becoming the most famous dispatcher in America, Rhea was beginning her iconic run as Carla Tortelli on Cheers, a role that would win her 4 Emmys. Danny spoke of her success with a pride that eclipsed any of his own accolades. Together, they didn't just perform a marriage, they built a fortress. They founded Jersey Films, a production company that would go on to shepherd masterpieces like Pulp Fiction, Erin Brockovich, and Matilda into existence. They operated on a code of loyalty that Hollywood rarely sees. When Quentin Tarantino was being rejected by every major studio, Danny and Rhea gave him office space and the freedom to make his film his way. They did all of this while raising 3 children, Lucy, Grace, and Jacob, with a rule that they would never go more than 2 weeks without creating something together. But the most telling story of their character happened during the filming of Matilda. the young lead Mara Wilson was facing. The unthinkable, her mother was dying of cancer. Danny and Rhea quietly stepped in, becoming her surrogate parents during the production. They cared for her, shielded her from the press, and made an unbearable time slightly more bearable. Before Mara's mother passed away, Danny secretly took a near-final cut of the film to the hospital so she could see her daughter's triumph before she closed her eyes for the last time. This was the man behind the monsters, the man who played the Penguin, and the dispatcher was in reality a man of immense quiet kindness. This is why the world was shattered in 2012 when Danny and Rhea announced their separation after 30 years of marriage. It felt like the end of hope for those who believed in Hollywood's only real couple. Rhea would later admit that the separation was incredibly difficult, fueled by the pressures of two massive ambitions and a lifetime of being consumed by work. But something strange happened. They did not divorce. They went to therapy, 38 sessions of intense, soul-searching work. Danny even rented out the restaurant where they had their first date for 4 years straight, trying to win back the woman who had seen him first. They reconciled, then separated again in 2017, yet the divorce papers were never filed. When asked why, Rhea's answer was simple and profound. "We've been together a very long time. There's a lot of love and history. Why ruin that with the yucky things that come with divorce?" Danny moved into a house less than a mile from Rhea's. They talk every single day. They share a Netflix account and text each other while watching the same shows from separate houses. At Lucy's birthday party in 2024, they were side by side, a tight family that defied every societal mold. In 2025, Danny began to break his silence on Fairbanks disease, not to seek pity, but to help others. It was revealed that he had secretly donated over $12 million to bone research, never once attaching his name to a press release or seeking credit. He had lived his life in pain, but he wanted to ensure the next generation wouldn't have to. He still refuses to change his face, still refuses to be second-rate, and still looks to Rhea Perlman as his North Star. At 81, he is still working, still producing, and still participating in daily conversations with the woman he met in a New York theater in 1970. Their relationship has evolved into a form the world doesn't quite recognize as traditional love, but perhaps it is something deeper. It is a testament to the fact that some bonds are too strong to be broken by a change in address. Danny DeVito found his soulmate when he had nothing, and he has spent the rest of his life making sure he never fully let her go. Their other kind of glory days are proof that staying even when it's complicated is the most honest thing two people can do. The Penguin found his match, and 55 years later, the conversation hasn't ended. Some people find each other early and never truly let go, and the rest of the story is just the beautiful, difficult, strange life that happens in between. Danny DeVito and Rhea Perlman are the final word on Hollywood loyalty, a mystery of the heart that reminds us all that true love doesn't need a marriage license to be eternal.